Hey guys, it's Tegan, Abby, and Carly, and today we'll be talking to you about Chapter 11, Families with Middle Eastern Roots.
The Middle East refers to the area around the southern and eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea, Persian Gulf region, and the Arabian Peninsula. The region is comprised of mainly 17 countries, including Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Palestine, Bahrain, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, and Yemen. But the term Middle East is also used to refer to Afghanistan, Algeria, Cyprus, Libya, Morocco, and Pakistan. Although values vary widely from country to country, the religious beliefs, common languages, and core values are shared by Central Asian countries, including, but not limited to, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Georgia. The variance in climate extremes allows for a wide variety of available crops, thus a wide variety in food. 2000 census data was skewed as it forced millions of Arabs to state they were white as there was an inadequate ethnic and racial categories. Some believe this was an attempt from the government to classify them as white and not grant them power. People who are Middle Eastern largely live in large metropolitan areas, with their largest population being in Los Angeles, California. The Kurds is a large ethnic group who represent large minorities in Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria. Religious statistics are not what one might expect, as 63% are Christian, 24% Muslim, and the remaining are split between Judaism and otherwise undeclared. In terms of education, they are the third most educated immigrant group and also have the second highest rate of graduate degrees out of 67 groups, obtaining almost a quarter of them. The first influx of immigrants came to the United States in 1875 seeking opportunities. Between 1890 and 1930, the Ottoman government forced large groups of Armenians to flee and seek refuge in the United States. Beginning in 1967, a continuous flow of immigrants came to the United States due to the Arab-Israeli conflict and wars. 1978 led to two large migrations. First, the beginning of the Iranian Revolution led to many religious minorities to flee the area. Also, the occupation of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union, followed by more than a decade-long deadly civil war, leading a flow of Afghani citizens out of Afghanistan and into host countries, which included the United States. The Iran-Iraq War, beginning in 1980, led to the largest group of immigrants fleeing the social and economic conditions brought by the Islamic fundamentalist government in Iran. The Persian Gulf War broke out in 1991, where Saddam Hussein killed thousands of Iraqi Kurds and Shia Muslims. Massive groups sought refuge in neighboring countries and eventually fled to the United States. After the events of 9/11, the flow of immigrants from the Middle East has greatly slowed, even as war and conflict continue to dominate the region. After the events of 9/11, many Americans began generalizing all Middle Eastern people as radical fundamentalists, even though the term Middle Eastern refers to one of the most diverse group of people in terms of geography, history, religious beliefs, linguistic practices, and racial makeup. Most Americans see the Middle East as the place of bad guys. In the 2002 census, the number of hate crimes against Muslims grew by 1,600%. Americans with an Arab or Muslim background have lost many of their civil rights. There is more discrimination and racial profiling when attempting to find a job or buy houses, things that many white people do easily. This institutional racism has affected nearly 60,000 Arab and Muslim immigrants, as well as 1.5 million Christian Arabs. Due to fear, many families are forced to keep a low profile to avoid being incarcerated or deported. This has led to increased rates in depression, anxiety, PTSD, guilt, and hopelessness. With the exception of Egypt, today's modern schools neglect to teach about the rich, ancient civilizations that provided so many contributions to science, technology, mathematics, arts and music, architecture, and medicine. Instead, modern schools only teach the modern idea of conflicts and wars that have been all over the news, which frequently do not discuss the reason for the wars. When discussing religious beliefs in the Middle East, it is important to note that many people who live in that region rarely identify by their race because their religious identity means a lot more. The main belief in Islamic culture is that God had given his final revelation to the Prophet Muhammad, whom they believe to the succession of the prophets, including Moses and Jesus. The Holy Book, which contains Muhammad's revelations and is believed to be the full expression of the divine will for human life, is to refer to as the Quran. After receiving the revelations, Muhammad gathered people and convinced them to give up their current beliefs and believe in one universal God. Finally, they left Mecca and migrated to a small town of Yathrib. Yathrib became known as Medina, or the city. The religion then split into two branches, the Sunnis and the Shias. The Sunnis, also the main body of Muslims, believed the Prophet had transmitted his temporal authority to a line of caliphs. Shias differed in the way they thought of the line of transmission. 5 rituals that had to be performed to maintain a sense of belonging within the Muslim community are known as the pillars of Islam. The first one, known as Shahada, is the testimony that there is no God, but God and Muhammad is God's prophet. This is the testimony in which a person becomes Muslim. It is repeated in their daily prayers and is how they distinguish themselves from other faiths. The second is known as Salat, which refers to the saying of the daily prayers. It is performed 5 times daily, at dawn, noon, midday, dusk, and early part of the evening. The prayer time is announced publicly in Muslim communities. Before prayer, Muslims participate in a ritual called wudu, in which they wash their hands, toes, face, and the crown of the head. During the prayer, they face the direction of Mecca and recite the unchanging prayer, which proclaims the greatness of God and the lowliness of man. The worshipper does motions of bowing, kneeling on the ground. After the prayer, they may participate in individual petitions. The third pillar, known as zakat, is the obligation of those whom income exceeds a certain amount to make donations for the poor, the needy, the release of debtors, the liberation of slaves, and the welfare of the homeless. The fourth pillar is San, which is the obligation to fast during Ramadan. Ramadan is the Arabic month during which the Prophet received his first revelations. During Ramadan, Muslims older than 10 must refrain from eating, drinking, and sexual intercourse from dusk to dawn. This fasting is seen as an act of repentance for sins. Lastly, Hajj, or the fifth pillar of Islam, translates to pilgrimage in Arabic. This pillar explains that every Muslim should visit Mecca at least once in their lifetime and should take place during a special month. Other rules in the Islamic community include the prohibition of murder and robbery, and also bans pork, alcohol, fornication, and charging or accepting interest on borrowed money. Jihad is the Arabic word for striving, or the idea that Muslims must protect and expand the scope of the community. Different groups use it in different ways. For example, one group may use it to stand up against Israeli occupation, while Al-Qaeda uses it to wage a holy war against everybody who contradicts Islam. Currently, the most widespread religion in the Middle East is Islam in Sunni form. The Middle Eastern region is known for their diverse use of language. Most languages are divided into 3 families: the Hamato-Semitic, Indo-European, and Altaic. The most spoken language is Arabic, which is also the 6th most spoken language in the world. The language itself has 29 letters, all of which are consonants, except for the first. The second most popular language is Turkish, and is mostly spoken in Turkey. The third most spoken language is Persian or Farsi. It is mainly spoken in Iran and helps to differentiate their language from the neighboring countries. Kurdish is spoken mainly by the Kurdish populations in Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria. Other major languages include Hebrew, Armenian, Assyrian, and Greek.
Those in the Middle East share many values. However, like any culture, there are many differences. Those who have more education and are from more urban areas have different values compared to those who do not have an education and live in rural areas. Also, these values may differ on other factors such as type of work, availability of time and space, religion, and overall exposure to Western culture. These differences determine shaping individual family values and child-rearing practices across the Middle East. Extended family is very important in the Middle Eastern culture. 3 generations of a family commonly live together, which I don't know about you, but that does not sound like fun to me. If the extended family does not live under the same roof, chances are they still live very close. Loyalty to one another and to their faith are the 2 top priorities in the household. These families use religious rules in their households, which is a difference between Western families who use secular rules. In the book, it states that the families often work together, which can be compared to an organization because the family sizes are so large. As a unit, they ensure that the children, elders, and those with disabilities are protected and cared for. The children in the family often get their entertainment from other siblings or extended family members. They spend a majority of their time together playing as a family. In the Middle East, an achievement that someone has is represented by the whole family. The achievement that another member has can sometimes be more important than their own individual achievements. They take pride in their ancestors and their achievements, even if they were not alive at the time that event occurred. The main source of happiness in the Middle Eastern culture is having children. Having children is often the reason that many marriages occur and could be the only reason that they are getting married, not that they are in love. The goal of having a baby boy is common in the Middle East. This culture lost many men to wars, which left only women. Having a baby boy repopulates the men. Midwives in villages will often receive gold jewelry if they deliver a boy, and nothing but mad stares for delivering a girl. However, once the child has arrived, boy or girl, the family then takes care of their child and tries to meet their needs. Those who do not take care of their children are looked down on greatly. However, those who are not educated may not know how to take care of their child the proper way. Many of those who have never had a child or have too many children rely on God to provide for their family. Abortions and birth control are only available in large cities in the Middle East. There are strict laws against abortions in many societies. In some cases of unwanted pregnancy, an abortion will be performed illegally in a private clinic by a physician. If a traditional rural mother truly does not want the pregnancy, she will take matters into her own hands and try and cause a miscarriage. If not immediate medical care is available, the mother could die. In many Middle Eastern homes, the women are seen as caregivers and the men are supposed to provide for their family. During pregnancy, the mother does not usually go to a doctor. One reason for this is because in rural areas, there are not any doctor's offices nearby. Another reason for not having regular doctor visits during pregnancy could be because of their religious views. The pregnant woman usually goes to a midwife who uses external signs to track how the pregnancy is going. Some of the external signs are eye expression, paling of the skin, navel shape, and if pain, the location of that pain. When it is time for the baby's arrival, the family will travel to the nearest hospital. Something a little different about delivery in the Middle East is that the father is not allowed in the delivery room. It's believed that if the father sees the mother give birth, he will lose his sexual attraction to his wife and will not want to have any more children. After the baby is born, the father may take care of the older siblings for a small amount of time, but oftentimes the extended family will come and assist when needed. Most Middle Eastern women prefer to breastfeed their babies if possible. They do not rush children to solid foods. Everything is at the baby's pace. Unlike most of the United States, Middle Eastern children are not put on a schedule, such as for feeding or sleeping. To begin the transition to solid foods, the mother may give the baby light tea or water. If someone gets sick in a rural area of the Middle East, it is a major issue. There are not any doctor's offices nearby, so many of the remedies used are very natural and involve items you may have at home. For example, a mother might give a child fig syrup or a mint essence to cure a stomach ache. Mothers in the Middle East believe that children can get a cold even from a light breeze. With this caution, they cover babies' heads and ears and could be considered overdressed at times. However, because there is not medical care in many regions of the Middle East, they are trying to avoid becoming ill. Mothers in the Middle East stay very close to their infants. While the baby is growing, he or she may have a separate wooden cradle that they sleep in, but not a separate room or nursery. In Iran, mothers will keep physical contact with their children by cradling the baby with their legs and doing another task with their hands, multitasking at its finest. Unlike in the West, mothers in the Middle East will allow their very young infants to be kissed, hugged, and held by family members. The infants are included in family events and outings. The Middle East and the West have very different views on attachment versus individuation. In the United States, there is a common pressure to have a child gain his or her independence as soon as possible. The child is often put on a schedule that they have from day to day, such as bathing, eating, and sleeping. There is also heavy stress on getting a child potty trained as fast as possible. Also in the West, it is common for children to have separate rooms from their parents and siblings. The West believes that there must be physical distance apart to have privacy as well. These beliefs are very different than the Middle Eastern culture. In the Middle East, they are firm believers in interdependence and child bonding. Because of these beliefs, a majority of infancy and toddlerhood is at the child's pace. There are no schedules and no rush to move to the next stages, such as solid foods or toilet training. As I have stated before, children often share rooms with siblings or parents. Those in the Middle East do not believe to have privacy, you need to be a physical distance away. Often, they will mentally check out to get their privacy. At the dinner table, talking is discouraged because it's a time of privacy. The amount of time that those in the Middle East spend together creates a strong emotional bond, especially children to their mothers. In the West, a common time for a child to move out is when they graduate high school or are headed to college. Those in the Middle East will not move out of their childhood homes until it's time for them to get married. If they are older and have yet to get married, all of their earnings will go to their parents. In the Middle East, when a family member passes away, it brings extreme sadness to the whole family. Mourning usually lasts for a year and then slowly fades as time passes. During services, the deceased is stripped of ornaments such as gold teeth and then washed from head to toe. They do this to prepare their loved one to meet his or her creator. He or she is then wrapped in a white cloth called a kafan and then placed into the grave. At the ceremony, men and women do not sit together. The women will normally sit in a circle and pound their chest, scratch their faces, and move their heads in a circular motion with their hair uncovered. This is all part of their grieving. The men may not show as much emotion but will usually cry. There are also professional mourners who release tension in those who are not crying and counsel them. After 40 days, the gravestone is placed on the grave, which is the amount of time that they believe it takes for a body to decompose. For those who are not family members, the most kind gesture is to bring food to the house, attend the ceremony, or send a card.
In the Middle East, there is a major focus in relationships between children and their families. Parents, especially mothers, will rarely go to activities such as social or recreational events without their children. Boys usually do not start to go to activities on their own until they have reached puberty. If a girl is unmarried, she will not attend activities by herself until she is older. Middle Eastern children spend more time with their families than American children do. Unlike American parents, Middle Eastern parents will let their children stay up as late as they want so they can spend time with them instead of putting them to bed early. Young children who haven't started school yet get to stay up as long as they choose. If they choose to go to bed, an adult, such as a mother, grandmother, or an older sibling, will sit in their rooms with them until they fall asleep. Children are also allowed to fall asleep in their parents' beds or during a gathering, but have to be moved to their own beds. Children are also allowed to bring a toy, such as a stuffed animal, to bed with them. Because young children can stay up as late as they want, afternoon naps are required. Adults and older children commonly take afternoon naps with the children. The most important form of entertainment in the Middle East is family gatherings. There are many occasions Middle Eastern families will gather and celebrate for. Some of the types of gatherings include weddings, remembering loved ones, and national or religious feasts. Another common form of gathering is visiting relatives or friends on a regular basis. Food is usually the center of any gathering. On certain occasions, music and dance will also be included in the celebration. Two games that are commonly played at gatherings include backgammon and chess and are usually played by male family members. During family gatherings, children are expected to find other children and play with them or entertain themselves. Another form of entertainment is television. When Middle Eastern families come over to the United States, they are captivated by television. Most parents find themselves watching TV as much as their children do. TV is usually the main form of entertainment of Middle Eastern families when they come to the United States, especially if they are not very educated. Middle Eastern families take religious and national events very seriously. Two of the most common and important feasts for Muslims are Eid Qurban and Eid al-Fitr. Eid Qurban marks the termination of the Hajj, or pilgrimage to Mecca, which is the house of God. Eid al-Fitr marks the termination of the fasting month of Ramadan. These feasts can fall on different dates of the year because the Muslims use a lunar calendar. Three significant feasts for Iranians are the Iranian New Year and Day of Equinox, as well as Nowruz. Nowruz is the celebration of spring that is observed by Iranians, Afghans, and some Lebanese and Central Asian societies. Guests are extremely important to Middle Eastern cultures. Families are expected to always welcome guests and treat them with the most respect and honor. They are given the best place and offered the best food the family has. Proverbs are important to any Middle Eastern culture and often talks about the importance of a guest. Muslims believe that guests are endeared by God and require ultimate respect and honor. These traditions are practiced by all types of classes. If poor families have guests, they will give up their only food if they have to. Children are also expected to respect and accommodate guests. If a guest is staying overnight, sometimes children will be expected to give up their rooms. They also are expected to entertain and interact with guests by not staying in their rooms or play areas. In the Middle East, children are encouraged to have responsibilities at an early age. Families from rural or poor urban sectors require children to start working at an early age. Boys usually start working around the age of 4 or 5 and will perform farming tasks or family sustenance. Girls will usually start working around the age of 5 or 6 and do household chores such as cooking or cleaning and sometimes taking care of younger siblings. Middle Eastern children in the United States have different expectations. In traditional families, boys are expected to study and receive the highest academic achievement possible. Girls are only expected to study and receive a modest education. In traditional Muslim families, a young girl's education might stop after puberty or elementary school because parents are concerned for her modesty. At school, parents believe a young girl is exposed or unguarded from temptations and peer pressure. Girls are also expected to learn household chores by the age of 5 or 6. Boys are typically exempt from all household chores so they can focus on academics. In non-traditional families, academic expectations are the same for boys and girls. Girls also have more household chores than boys. In Middle Eastern families, the father is considered head of the household. He controls the finances, socialization outside of the family, and discipline. Because the father is considered higher than the rest of the family, he separates himself from the mother and the children, which means he doesn't participate in day-to-day activities with them. The main role of the father is to discipline his children. Even though fathers usually like to play with their infants and toddlers, they have little knowledge on the developmental status of each child. Fathers also do not provide much caregiving because it is the mother's responsibility. Patriarchy is typical in all Middle Eastern cultures and religions. The severity of patriarchy depends on the father's level of education and the family's level of traditionalism. In the most extreme cases in the Persian Gulf and Arabian Peninsula, women and children are placed in the same category and are under the father's rule. Women have little to no economic power and their only job is to have and to care for children. Women also get little contact with people outside the family, and who she sees is controlled by the husband. Middle Eastern families in urban and rural regions differ from those in the Persian Gulf and Arabian Peninsula. Women usually work with men and have authoritarian power in the family. The main power is still held by the husband. Women can have less power if they have a low educational background and little contact with others outside of the family. This is usually uncommon because in most Middle Eastern cultures, women have high levels of education. They have jobs in the professional and political settings. Fun fact, in Iran, there are more women in college than men. In America, Middle Eastern women seek higher education and aim for economic independence. Currently in the Middle East, women are fighting for their rights. Some of the rights and issues they are fighting for are divorce, child custody, and inheritance. Unfortunately, feminists and women's rights organizers are often harshly punished. They are put in prison or life-threatening situations. Because of the advances in technology, women's rights organizations have become more known and powerful. In the United States, Middle Eastern women can choose to continue and practice their traditions or decide to leave it in the past. These women are struggling to find a balance between their new human rights as women and religious traditions. When people from the United States work with families, they need to remember that women can have little education or they can have the highest education. On the other hand, interventionalists may witness traditional roles in the Middle Eastern families. In these settings, the father usually speaks on behalf of the entire family because most of the time the mother does not speak English. Another reason this could be is because fathers believe they still should be the person who communicates with people outside of the family. Fathers believe anyone else in the family might share too much information about the family to a stranger. Having the father as the sole communicator can cause problems if the father is not educated enough, because he might relay a bunch of information to the mother in a few sentences. Interventionalists emphasizing the father's day-to-day care for a child is important for success. Middle Eastern parents are generally high in demand, control, and warmth towards their child. Most children are not disciplined until after the age of 3. Before the age of 3, children are not on a set schedule that requires any discipline. They are toilet trained when they are ready and do not have many rules on sleeping, eating, or dressing. Fathers usually do not have much responsibility with caring for a child during infant and toddler years. He may spank or scold a child if they break something valuable in the house. When a child needs something, the father usually calls the mother to satisfy their need. When a child reaches the age of 4 or 5, the father starts taking more responsibility, especially with boys. The type of discipline a child receives is based on the father's level of education. Physical punishment used to be seen as a rule, but now is an exception. Physical punishment is seen as love, so there is no punishment for parents. Children in traditional families are expected to follow rules without explanation. In non-traditional families, children have more freedom and rules can be changed by their parents. Children are supposed to learn how to act by following examples of adults around them with little explanation from the parents. They can be reminded what is good or bad and can be disciplined by extended family. In the United States, problems start to arise if there is no extended family around to help raise a child. When this happens, there is lack of support and no examples for parents to show their children how to act. Languages also cause issues because some parents have little education and can't communicate with their children that are in school. Acculturation is another concern, but primarily for girls. Parents can't keep up with the pace of the acculturation of their children. The parent's worst fear is that their daughter will engage in premarital sex from peer pressure that she is experiencing in school. Infants in the Middle East are surrounded by an abundance of stimulation in their environments. They also experience a lot of adult interaction through talking, moving, and physical touch. Toddlers, on the other hand, have restrictions. They have limited exploration because the parents fear the child will become injured. They are also not allowed to touch objects owned by adults. The amount of toys a toddler has depends on how much the family can afford. Toddlers often receive more verbal stimulation from other adults rather than their parents. They learn how to recite different rhymed poems that are important to Middle Eastern culture. More educated adults and parents show toddler picture books and read to them. School is important for young children in the Middle East. Parents usually expect their child to do well in school. Children do not receive as much praise for doing something good as children in the United States do. Parents usually get upset if their child isn't doing well and usually denies the problem, blames the child or school, or feels ashamed. The attitude towards disability in the Middle East is usually negative. Families that have a child with a disability feel guilt and shame. Guilt is usually felt by the mother, and shame is usually felt by the father. Parents who experience these feelings usually also experience constant denial, isolation from the outside world, or feel the need to overprotect their child. Some parents abandon their child completely. These feelings can be changed or differentiate if the parents are educated in special education. When mothers are uneducated, they may feel like they are being punished for something they did in the past. Some of the actions uneducated mothers believe could result in punishment are lifting heavy objects, unsuccessful abortions, eating certain foods, or thinking about certain taboos in pregnancy. Another reason a mother could be punished is if they married their first cousin, which is acceptable in some Middle Eastern cultures. Social attitudes towards disabilities depend on the severity and type of disability. Children that have a mild cognitive disability usually can grow up and have a normal life with help from their family. Boys can still work under the guidance of their fathers, and girls can eventually marry and have a family. If a child has a severe cognitive disability, families will isolate themselves because of the pity they experience. Severe mental disabilities often cause families to isolate themselves from any activity that involves socializing. Families do this because they do not want people feeling bad for them. Unfortunately, isolation results in more stress and difficulty taking care of the child with a disability. Extended family do not come around as often because they do not know how to react or talk about a child's disability. Often, families with a child who has a mental disability believe educating them isn't important because they will not retain the information or understand what is going on around them. In the United States, Middle Eastern families often have little tension at home because of the acceptance of children with disabilities. They can still feel the feelings that many families in the Middle East feel if they have little education and have traditional beliefs. Language could also be a barrier if families try to get help from an interventionalist in the United States. Many people in the Middle East are bilingual or multilingual. Some schools in certain Middle Eastern countries teach English. Middle Easterns rely heavily on shared experiences, situations, and nonverbal cues in communication with others. Direct no's are considered rude or impolite. A weak yes, maybe, or perhaps are considered politer and usually replace no. Yes can also mean agreements have been made, so most people rely on the listener to determine the meaning and context of the answer. Indirect communication also implies yes. When offered something, a Middle Eastern might say thank you or don't trouble yourself if they do not want it or expect the person to understand what they're wanting or saying. This causes issues when trying to communicate with someone outside the Middle Eastern culture, so an interpreter is recommended. Many Middle Easterns like to stand closer than Americans would when communicating face to face. Men kiss each other on both cheeks when greeting each other, while women hug and kiss when greeting each other. Male friends are known to hold hands as well as female friends, which shows friendship and support. Following this presentation, we have our cultural perspective activity where we made tahini sauce. We will show you a video of someone else making it and then pass out samples. This is the end of our presentation. Thanks for watching.